Okay, um, I was asked to make a video of how to create a Tibia style sprite in Blender. I've never done a Blender video, but here we go. I started with this model here that you can see. I've done a little prep work on the model itself, but that shouldn't affect the procedure because the procedure should work for any model. So let's get started. The first thing you want to do is set your resolution to a appropriate sized resolution for Tibia, which is 32 by 32 tiles. I'm going to go with a 2 by 2 tile, so it'll be 64 by 64. And uh, Blender automatically scales this and so you want to set that to 100%. The next thing that you want to do is, since we're trying to emulate pixel work, you want to turn off, or no, you don't want to turn it off, but you want to adjust the anti-aliasing. And I found that the Catmull ROM method works best, and moving it up to the maximum, which is 1.5 pixels, works best. And then we do want to have outlines, so we want to be sure to check the freestyle button while we're here in the scene properties. Next, we'll go to the render layers, and we've got a few settings to adjust there. First, we want to uncheck the sky. That means that when you render it, the sky or anything that isn't the actual model that you're rendering will be rendered as transparent instead of whatever the sky is set as. Next, down here in your freestyle, we want to change a few settings in your freestyle line set. First, we want to uncheck all of these. Typically, the sprites only have a border around the edge of the sprite, and that is the contour. And you might go ahead and do the external contour of your object, depending on how you got that set up. And we also need to change the line style of in freestyle. First, I like to use round caps instead of butt caps. And butt caps would be they're a version of square caps. And then thickness, I set the thickness to 1 pixel, and I always set it to outside. That way it's outside the entirety of the model instead of inside or crossing over the border of the model. Next, we need to go to your world settings. There's one setting in there that I like to change. This is more of a personal preference. You could fix this with lighting, but I just find it's easier to do environmental lighting, and I set that to pretty low. I set that to 0.1. All right, so that's setting up our scene as far as the settings are concerned. Next, we need to start working on the model. I prefer to move I like to move the model into the center. You see this square here? I look at that as being the kind of the where the each tile will be. So I want to move it to the center of the tile, and I might adjust that later. But more importantly, I want to scale it. If you look up here, you see it's scaled. Right now, it's Z, which is how tall it is 1.75. I feel like 1.5 works best for those sprites. So you hit S to scale, which you can see down at the bottom left. You can see follow along any keys that I press. And I scale it down. When I get close, you can hold shift and it'll scale at a slower rate, so you can fine tune it to get exactly where you want it to be. It looks like I need to move it centered just a little bit more. When you hit G to translate, if you hit X, you'll only be able to move it on the X axis. All right, so that looks good for me. The next thing we need to do is add a lattice. You do that by hitting Shift A, lattice, and the lattice doesn't need to be anywhere. It needs to be, actually it doesn't need to be anywhere. It needs to be kind of, since I'm doing two tiles, you want it to be right at the center of the first tile and the second tile up on the Z axis. Now I can try to position it, but I found it easier if you switch this to absolute grid, and when you're translating it, hold Control, it will snap to the grid. I snap it to right there. The next thing we need to do is scale it by 2. And so I hit S and 2. You can see that again. Then we need to, this is a cube lattice, as you can see. We don't want a cube lattice, we want it to be just a line because the whole model will be scaled by that line. And the lattice needs to be changed to a linear lattice, not a B-spline lattice, which is the default. So you come over here to your lattice properties, you set the U to 1, V to 1, and now you see it's just a line. And then change the mode to linear. Okay. Now we could hit tab to enter edit mode on the lattice. I find that about 1.5 blender units over for every 2 up is about right for Tibia. So I move that over and I hold Control again to snap it to the grid. Now this line is longer than 1. That'll make it look stretched when you render it. But there's a neat property about these. Now this particular angle, if you scale it by 0.8, it is now 1 unit or 2 units long, which is what it started out as. And so that's where we want it to be. And now the lattice will translate it. So you want to move this, so this bottom one, and it's easier to move. You want to move the bottom one so that it is right here where it was to begin with. It's easier to do that if you switch your pivot point to the active element, and as you can see, the circle is moved around that point there, which is where I wanted the one, and so I move it, and now it'll snap that point to the origin, or to where its origin is, and that'll make sure that this model, the feet stay where they are, and only it'll move more and more as it gets towards the head. Hold on, let me unlock my notes. Alright, next thing to do is add the lattice modifier to the model. This is where the magic is for getting it to work with Blender, or with Tibia. You see this little wrench here in the model when you select the model? That is the modifiers, and it has an armature because the original model had an armature. That isn't necessary, only if you want to pose it, but that's not what I'm doing. You want to add a lattice modifier, and when you've got that added, you set your object, or choose your object, and there's only one lattice in this scene, and there you go. Now he is sheared as if ready for Blender, and as you can see, it kind of looks, even if you look at it from the top, because I have the camera in orthographic mode, it looks kind of like it should. But that's not what we need to do if we're going to render it. We need to add a camera. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit and add my camera. I add the camera. I like to set the camera so that it's looking straight down. And I like to set it so that it's two units above the 2 that I'm working in. That's not necessary. You can have it other places, especially since we're going to be using orthographic. And an orthographic camera, it doesn't matter where it's set, as long as you don't set it down here somewhere where it will cut off anything that's above this little point right here. But I've got it centered. Now we come over here to the camera properties, and that's this tab right there. You want to set to orthographic, and the orthographic scale, you want it to be 2, because again, we're working with a 64 tile, and each unit is 1 tile. And the last thing before we can render, well, the last thing we need to do to add before we can render is a sunlight. I prefer the sunlight. It makes all the light is coming from one direction. You can add a point light or any of the other lights. They work a little bit differently. Like if you ever set a point light right here, well, you'd have rays coming off here and here this way, and so the model would have shadows different. The the light would be really close and you'd have shadows would be different. I don't really know how to explain that very well. With the sunlight though, I can move no matter where I set it. All the rays are going to follow this line here. Now with Tibia, the light usually comes, from the top left of the screen, but because of the way the model is skewed, it actually looks pretty good if you just leave it pointing straight down. As you can see, it's pointing straight down in every dimension. And so now we can look at here, and as you can see, this model is going to render in this box. We want it to be more about right there. That's about where we want it to be. And let's see what it looks like. There you go. That's it.